and just like do my thing in there.
Whether you're a working mom or you're a stay-at-home mom, we're all full-time moms, and we're just doing the best that we can.
And salvation's the one thing. It doesn't matter how fast you run or hard or how much you work or what you do or what you give. No matter what you do, you're not going to earn it. You know, he loves you already. That spot is saved.
Well, hey, everybody. How are you today? We good? So as you can see, next weekend, we're having a very special Mother's Day at Eastside that's going to be meaningful, I know, to every person and every member of your family, guys and gals. Elizabeth Hasselbeck is not only a best-selling author, contestant on Survivor, television host on The View and Fox and Friends, but she is just an authentic and passionate follower of Jesus Christ. She was a college athlete, her husband Tim, an ex-NFL quarterback, and now an analyst for ESPN, and with 3 kids, ages 13 and under, they're trying to figure out how to balance life's demands just like all of us. And so it's going to be great. Invite some friends next weekend. We'll have some great photo opportunities at your campus to make some memories with mom or some friends. We've got lots of invite cards, so if you need some extras, grab some on the way out today. And guys, I'm just trying to help you out by reminding you, let me repeat this. Next weekend is Mother's Day. One more time, next weekend is, okay, we're good, okay. But today we're continuing in part 3 of our iHope series. And so as we get started, let's give a great big welcome to our Eastside family on the other side of the camera in La Habra, Park Rapids, Bellflower, Anaheim, our newest campus out in Redlands. We love you guys so much. And I love the month of May because I get to visit every campus personally and bless our change makers and thank them. And it's just so cool. I'm going to be in La Habra tonight and Bellflower this Wednesday night. So looking forward to that. And Park Rapids and Redlands, I'll see you in a couple weeks, okay? Now, I want to get started today by showing you one of my favorite videos of all time. And I can guarantee you, if you're a parent or a grandparent, you've experienced this at least once in your life. Take a look.
What is it? What did Santa bring?
I want it. I want a toy.
What is it?
I want a toy. I want a toy.
Look.
I want a toy.
Open it up, see what it is. Look, it's a princess shirt.
I want a toy. I want a toy. I want a toy.
It's a lovely princess shirt.
I want a toy. I want a toy.
Don't you like it?
I want a toy.
How many of you been there? Show of hands. Yeah, been there in your life. Absolutely. I want a toy. I want a toy. I heard that grandchildren are God's reward for not murdering your own children. Now, as adults, we get disappointed too, right? We're just better at disguising our disappointments. If you're married, you know what it's like to have a spouse that somehow just doesn't get it. Like you told your husband, you know, hey, I want these boots and I want them in this size, but he wants to be creative. He wants to think outside the shoebox. And so you open the present and it's like a box of Jenny Craig or something. It's like the worst possible gift he could have given, right? Or guys, maybe you want some kind of new iPhone or lesser phone or whatever it is, and the box is the right size and shape, and instead of getting the phone you wanted, you open it up, and it's like nose hair clippers. And you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. Now, here's what I've discovered about life. We don't always get what we want. And sooner or later, we all experience loss. For you, it might be the loss of a job. It might be the loss of a dream. Sometimes it's the loss of health or the loss of a friendship. It might even be the loss of a family or the loss of a marriage, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a child. Barbara and I know about loss firsthand because it happened to us. We've been married for over 26 years now, have 3 kids and a grandson. We couldn't love more, but many of you are new enough to Eastside. You may be surprised to learn that back in the 80s, both Barbara and I went through painful divorces. Very similar circumstances. In the late 80s, I heard those words I never dreamed that I would hear when the woman I was married to said, "I'm in love and involved with another man." And the next morning, she was gone. And despite relentless attempts at reconciliation, she never returned, and she married the guy. That was not how I envisioned my life. And Barbara went through something very similar. And so today, I want to continue our iHope series by speaking on the theme, Hope Alone. And I want to unpack one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. It's from the Old Testament book of Ruth. Ruth is a book for anyone who's ever dealt with loss, anyone who's ever dealt with disappointment or grief, a sense of hopelessness. It's for anyone who's faced a season where you feel very alone. And as the book of Ruth begins, there's a famine in the land of Israel. And we don't know if this famine was a result as a judgment from God or a famine because of natural causes, but there was a man named Elimelech. Everybody say Elimelech. Elimelech, yeah. Elimelech, 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 in the jungle. No, I don't think that's a different one, okay? Well, Elimelech decides to move his family away from the promised land of Israel to a foreign country named Moab during the famine. Now notice Elimelech's name may mean that my God is king, but he didn't live up to his name. Because instead of trusting the one living God through the famine, he goes to Moab and he trusts in their food supply. Now his wife's name is Naomi, which means pleasant or sweet. And his sons have bizarre names, Mahlon and Chilion, which means sick and dying, okay? So please don't name your kids that, okay? I'd like you to meet my boys here. This is bird flu and walking pneumonia. Well, as the story unfolds, these two boys grow up and they fall in love with two Moabite women. These are not believers in God, and their names are Ruth and Orpah. And Orpah, quite a name. I tried to convince Barbara to name one of our girls Orpah. I thought Orpah Apple had kind of a nice ring to it. She didn't see it the same way I did. But by the time you get to the end of the second paragraph of just the first chapter of Ruth, tragedy strikes in the form of loss. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, dies. We're not told how. We don't know if it was old age, heart attack, got hit by a camel. We don't know. Then, unbelievably, about the same time, both of her adult age sons, sick and dying, died too. Big shock there, right? And so now you've got three widows. You've got Naomi and Ruth and Orpah, her two daughters-in-law, and they're all sharing the Kleenex box and grieving together. Can you imagine the grief of losing your husband and both your kids at the same time? Shortly after my dad died, when I was 14 years old, my brother Greg and my mom and I were going to have breakfast together one morning out on our patio. And Mom gave Greg the plates to go out and set the table. But a moment later, he came back in the house, kind of had a sheepish look on his face. She'd given him one too many plates. That's hard. Mom wept when she realized what she had done. You see, all three of these women are battling what many of you have battled at some point or are battling right now in your life. Loneliness. Many of you have heard me tell before, but many have not heard me tell before about my first Christmas alone again. I'll never forget it. After our Christmas Eve services in Vegas, where I was serving as a pastor, I intended to grab something to eat at a drive-thru after the service and then go home, do some laundry and pack. And I was going to fly home Christmas morning to spend Christmas Day with 20 members of my family in the Midwest. And I got away from the church that night about 9:30, and I was starving. I hadn't eaten since the middle of the day when I had had a sandwich. And I started driving around on this unusually cold and windy night in Las Vegas. And I went down the street. There was a little chicken drive-thru restaurant, and it was closed. And I thought, no problem. I'll go next door to the taco drive-thru. It was closed. And I thought, well, I got to find something. So I drove about another mile away. There was a Jack in the Box. I was really getting desperate. But Jack in the Box was closed. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I'll go to my supermarket. They're open 24 hours a day. I'll just go to the deli. My supermarket was closed. I'd never seen the city that never sleeps so quiet. And as I drive around on this unusually cold and windy night in Las Vegas, I think about, all the families, they're celebrating their Christmases around their Christmas tree. And I'm remembering when I was growing up, that's how my family, we always celebrated Christmas on Christmas Eve. And I'm starting to get depressed. I'm starting to have a little pity party for myself. But there was absolutely nothing to eat at my house, so I was determined to find something to eat. So finally, I drove out to the east edge of Las Vegas where there's a country western themed casino called Sam's Town. And when I pulled up, to my surprise, the place was hopping. The parking lot was full, and I walked into the casino, and there's people playing slot machines and video poker machines and the table games. And I go up to the second story. They had a 50-style diner, sat down at a table for 4, all by myself, and ordered the blue plate special. It was like a bad dream. I sat there thinking, I can't believe it. I just spoke for thousands of people. And here I am at Sam's Town on Christmas Eve eating meatloaf and mashed potatoes and gravy alone. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, somebody put a quarter in the jukebox and Elvis started singing in my ear, "Are you lonesome tonight?" Absolutely true. And your sympathy is very meaningful to me, I think. I feel the love. Honestly, I started laughing probably to keep from crying. And the thought that just overwhelmed me was, Gene, here you are, one of the most blessed guys in the world. You got a church family that loves you, that has stood with you through thick and thin. You got more friends than should be legally allowed to have. You're flying home in the morning to spend Christmas Day with 20 members of your family. And if you of all people can be lonely tonight, imagine how difficult this night is for those people who don't have anybody. As I walked out of the casino that night, I watched all these people. I'm telling you, it was like the Holy Spirit just sent a dart right into my soul. I'm watching them play all the games and everything, and I'm thinking, they don't have anywhere else to go tonight either. Why else would they be here on Christmas Eve? Naomi decides after the death of her husband Elimelech and her 2 sons that the best thing for her loneliness would be if she moved back to her hometown in Canaan, the promised land, because she wasn't from Moab. There was no welfare in Moab, no churches, no family, no help in Moab. But her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, are so fond of her, they decide they're going to go with her. But part of the way down the road, Naomi tries to send them back. She basically says, you girls don't need the extra baggage of your old mother-in-law. You need a man. Go back home. And one of them, Orpah, she turned around and she went back to Moab. But Ruth insisted on going with Naomi. And Ruth makes this statement to her in Ruth chapter 1, beginning verse 16. She says, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Now, where have you heard that statement before? At weddings, right? And that's a nice statement for husbands and wives to make to one another, but if we're really going to be accurate with the text, what should happen in weddings is the bride should turn away from the groom and say to her new mother-in-law, where you go, I will go. That's not going to happen, right? That's a tradition I predict probably will not catch on. But Ruth, think about this. She saw her newfound singleness as a positive challenge, a wonderful opportunity for adventure. Ruth was saying to Naomi, I don't have anything tying me down here. I don't have any kids. I think I'll go someplace completely new. I like to travel. Let's go. I like that Ruth didn't lock herself in a room and wallow in self-pity. She began to search for a new adventure in life, even though that was risky. I remember when I was single again, a buddy and I decided we were going to take a little vacation to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And 3 days later, we were there. Now, as a married guy, there's no way I could go home today and pull something off like that. Hey, Barbara, guess what? We're going to Puerto Vallarta in 3 days. I'd be single again, friends. I can tell you that right now. There are too many responsibilities and people affected by that spirit of adventure when you're married. So Ruth and Naomi, they take this adventuresome trip to Naomi's hometown, and her hometown is Bethlehem. Where have you heard of Bethlehem before? All of a sudden, we get our first clue why this story is in the Bible. Bethlehem is a town at that time of less than 200 people. It really is, oh, little town of Bethlehem. And so when Naomi, this hometown girl, returns to this little town, it's big news. People start to talk. They say, is that her? Doesn't look like her. She's changed. Is that Naomi? Now remember, her name means pleasant or sweet. But Naomi says, beginning in chapter 1, verse 20, don't call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant or sweet, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? Why call me pleasant and sweet? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Can't you just see the expression on her face with those words? She's angry. She's mad at God. Because God has not held up his end of the deal. I wanted a toy. I wanted a toy. This just isn't right. And so you read the story about Naomi and you think, well, this is really a story about loss. Naomi loses her home, loses her land, loses her husband, loses both of her two sons. It's a story about loss. But here's the question I would ask. Does it have to be about loss? She loses a lot. There's no doubt about it. But is that what the story has to be about? Gerald Sitzer was in a car accident, hit by a drunk driver in a minivan. And in it, he lost 3 generations of his family. He lost his mom, he lost his wife, and he lost his young daughter. But he was not hurt. And he's written a book about going through that journey, and the book is called A Grace Disguised. I like that title. And here's what he says. He says, the experience of loss does not need to be the defining moment of our story. Now, it's one thing if I said that. It's another thing for him to say that. The defining moment can be our response to the loss. The story doesn't have to be about loss. The story could be about your response to the loss. In other words, we don't get to decide what roles we play in the story of our lives, but we do get to decide how we will play the roles that we're given. And so you reach this point in loss, you reach this point in your own story, where you just have to decide. Is this going to define me? Is this what my life and story is going to be about? Is it just going to be a story of loss? Or could there be something different? That's hard. We tend to get focused on what's happening right in front of us right now. And we open the box and we find a sweater instead of a toy. And there's just this disappointment. But here's what we're going to see. If there's one word to describe the story of Naomi and Ruth, it's not loss, it's redemption. Now, once Ruth and Naomi arrive on this adventure to Bethlehem, Ruth goes to the fields and begins to pick up grain that was left behind by the farmers, because there was a law in Israel that poor people could collect the grain that was left on the edges of the field. It was like their welfare system. That wasn't a very glamorous or lucrative job. Today it'd be like someone who picks up aluminum cans along the side of the road for a living. But you have to respect Ruth for starting somewhere and going to work. And it was there while she was working in that field that she encounters the final main character in this story, whose name is Boaz. He's the owner of the field, a godly guy who apparently had never married, just like some of you. Some have never married because they've been disillusioned by people that they've dated. Some have never married because they were disillusioned by the examples of their parents, the dynamics that happened in their family of origin. Some desperately want to be married. The right opportunity has not come along yet. It's like the widow who was crying over a container of ashes one day. She was just, he was my 4th husband, she sobbed. And an elderly lady who had never married overheard that remark and said, she's got husbands to burn and I can't even find one. Now, the fact of the matter is that many have never married because they have chosen to be single. In fact, the Bible talks in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 how some followers of Jesus have a spiritual gift to be single, some for a season, some for a lifetime. Ruth chapter 2, verse 3 says, so she, Ruth, went out and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. As it turns out, wouldn't you know, that's my favorite verse in the entire story right there. As it turns out, go figure, just so happened, what a coincidence. The story unfolds coincidentally, she ends up in Boaz's field, this wealthy, single, godly guy who, unbeknownst to Ruth, is a relative of her late husband. He's from the clan of Elimelech. Now, to make a long story short, Boaz takes an interest in Ruth. He befriends her, really likes her, and when her mother-in-law, Naomi, finds out what's going on, she plays Cupid, and she says to Ruth, she says, now, I know where Boaz will be tonight, so here's what I want you to do. You wash, you put on your perfume, your prettiest clothes, you look nice, and then you go to the barn where he's going to be working, and after he eats and lies down to go to sleep, you go lie down at his feet, and he will tell you what to do from there. You say, what is she telling her to do? It's not what you think, okay? This is not a hookup. It's the furthest thing from a hookup. Actually, it's a proposal. Naomi is telling Ruth to prepare herself like a bride and to announce to Boaz that she's interested, available, and willing to relocate, okay? She's actually a very liberated woman. Now listen to as I read what happens next. This is a paraphrase from the Living Bible. It says, suddenly around midnight, he wakened and sat up startled. There was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He demanded. You know, it's dark. He's just wiping the sleep out of his eyes. Who are you? It's I, sir, Ruth, she replied. Make me your wife according to God's law, for you are my close relative. Thank God for a girl like you. I guess so, he exclaimed. Now don't worry about a thing, my child, he said. I'll handle all the details, for everyone knows what a wonderful person you are. Isn't that a great story? Kind of reminds me of the woman whose husband died, and she was so distraught, and she had inscribed on his tombstone, the light of my life has gone out. But 5 years later, she fell in love and married again, and she wasn't sure what to do about the tombstone. So she finally went back and she had inscribed underneath it, but I struck a new match. Now, I think this story has such an important practical application for all of us today. Boaz, this guy Boaz, is what's called all throughout the book of Ruth as a guardian redeemer. Let me explain the guardian redeemer law. When a man at that time fell into hard times and was forced to sell his land, his nearest relative or guardian redeemer, redeemed it, was called to step in and purchase the land or buy it back from an outsider to keep that relative's property from coming under the ownership of someone outside their clan, outside their tribe. And I know that seems weird, but this was set up so that land wouldn't be lost to the family. So Boaz comes along and says, I will buy the property of Elimelech. I will take responsibility for Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, Elimelech's wife. And it's just no small act of kindness and sacrifice here, especially when you consider that Ruth is a Moabite, which means she was a foreigner from a pagan land that the men of that area would have had nothing to do with in that days. But Boaz says, I will step forward to care for this woman that no one else will care for, love who no one else will love. I will redeem who no one else will redeem. But actually, there was one relative closer who had the right of first refusal before Boaz. So Boaz goes to this guy who has the right of first refusal on the land and the family, and he says, hey, there's this land you can redeem if you want to. Oh, and one other thing, on the day you buy the land, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, you know, that pagan foreigner, you know, she was from Moab. And you also get the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name on the deed of this property. Is that great or what? It's like you went to buy a house and you wonder why it's so cheap. And the realtor tells you, well, there's a mother-in-law upstairs and she comes with the house. And she likes people to call her bitter. I'm sure you'll really enjoy her. And at that point, the other relative is like, I'm out, buy it yourself, okay? So in the last chapter of the book of Ruth, we read in chapter 4, verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. And when he made love to her, does anybody need me to unpack that in the original Hebrew to understand that? When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. What a beautiful story, right? So this is an amazing man. He has no legal obligation to do this. It's just pure grace. And what does Boaz get out of the deal? He gets an awesome wife. What kind of man was Boaz before this? Ruthless. Oh, come on, that's funny. I've been waiting to say that all week. Some of you are like, that's the only thing I'm going to remember today from church. Boaz comes along and says, I will buy the property, I will take responsibility, and he goes out of his way to redeem this foreign woman. Now follow me now. As it turns out, Boaz has a mother that a few of you may have heard of. Does anybody remember when the Israelites were preparing to enter the promised land? There was a prostitute in Jericho. She was a foreign non-believer who helped the Israelite spies. Her name was Rahab. Well, as it turns out, Rahab the streetwalker had a son. As it turns out, she named him Boaz. As it turns out, Boaz grew up to be a man who honored God, and perhaps because his own mother was also from a foreign culture and a land and had changed from following pagan gods to the God of Israel, Boaz was able to show Ruth comfort, generosity, and protection. As it turns out, Boaz and Ruth had a son. As it turns out, Ruth 4:17 says, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Come on, is this a cool story or what? Ruth's great-grandson was King David. And when you get to the New Testament and you read the Christmas story, in Bethlehem, in Matthew chapter 1, it begins with the genealogy of this baby born in a manger. You discover this is the family tree. And it's all right there in Matthew 1. Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho, has a son named Boaz who hooks up with Ruth, and they have a son named Obed who has a son named Jesse who has a son named David. And then eventually we get to the Christmas story in Bethlehem. Why Bethlehem? Because that's where Joseph and Mary had to go to register for the census, because this is where their lineage was from Bethlehem, also known as the city of David. And lo and behold, through their lineage, through their loss, through their pain would come Jesus, the Redeemer of the entire world, who brings us hope today. Because you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you might just find you get what you need. I admire Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz because all three of them show us how to experience hope alone. Boaz, who was single most of his adult life, eventually married a wonderful woman. Ruth, who was married and saw that marriage cut short when she was young, like Barbara and me, was given a second chance at marriage. Naomi remained single for the rest of her life, but she experienced joy and contentment and fulfillment and happiness, though unmarried, through her relationship with God, just like my own 96-year-old mama has for the last 45 years, who hope alone is in Jesus Christ every single day. And the good news is, no matter what loss you have experienced, you can find that too. Friends, as one who has experienced hope alone, I can tell you firsthand, when Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," he meant it. You tell me, what friend, what spouse, what boyfriend, what girlfriend can say a statement like that to you and meet the deepest need, the deepest part of your soul? We've got to have an authentic daily relationship with Jesus Christ because he's our hope. He's our guardian redeemer. He's our healer. And if your story looks like a story of loss today, like you weren't seeing the rest of the story, could I remind you, your story doesn't have to be a story of loss, but your story could be a story of how you respond to the loss. And I know from your perspective right now, it's not good, it's not easy. And maybe you're all prayed out today and you think you're gonna never get through what you're going through. You wanted a toy. But can I encourage you, don't give up on God too soon. Because just like Ruth and just like Naomi, just how they couldn't see how God would redeem their loss, God's got a great story that he's writing for you that you can't see right now. And he's always going to have the last word. And at the end of the day, for all of us, he is our hope alone. Let's bow our heads together. Today, I want to invite you not to face the future, to not face another day, another moment in your life without your guardian redeemer, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Loss does not have to define you. Your response to the loss could define you. Jesus came to bring hope, to redeem your pain and past. And today, would you just silently pray these words and say, Jesus, be my guardian redeemer. Be my hope. With similar words like Ruth said to Naomi, maybe you could pray to Jesus and just say, Jesus, today, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. And you, Lord Jesus, will be my God. I want to ask our campus pastors and hosts at each of the sites to come and close right now. And I'll close here. God, for my brothers and sisters today who are in chapters of their life where it's a season of loss. There's no doubt about it. It hurts. It's awful. It's painful. Some, their brokenness is as fresh as something that's happened this week. For others, it's something that has lingered for years. And I thank you that you are our guardian redeemer. I thank you that loss does not have to define our story, but because of a bloodstained cross and an empty tomb, it could be our response to the loss. And God, I, for one, am so thankful that I have chosen to trust you through the losses of my life. And I thank you for the way that you have redeemed those situations over time. And I pray for those who just need to hold on today. Thank you for your promise that all who are weary and burdened can come to you, and you will give us rest. We choose to put our hope and our trust in you alone. And we thank you for being such a faithful, redeeming God that we can trust. And we lift our prayers now in Jesus' name and for his sake. And everybody said, amen.